G'day, folks. Welcome here to a very exciting episode, something that I'd like to be doing more and more of. And I thought there's no better way to kick this off than with a hobby hero, a Warhammer hero, the lore master himself, a man of many armies, most that he doesn't own because he flips them. Probably doesn't need any introduction. It is Doug from 2 Plus Tough. How are you, good sir?
Hey, everybody. I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's an honor and a privilege, and I'll get you to sign my screen at some point, and imagine that I've got that forever as a like a memorable moment for this. But do you want to do a better introduction to yourself than that botched attempt? I thought it was okay.
Yeah. So I'm Doug. I have a channel called 2 Plus Tough on YouTube. We talk all about mostly Games Workshop, games lore, but I've been dipping my toe in some of this stuff too. Most famously, I guess, around Age of Sigmar. It started when most folks hated the game and didn't think there was lore, and just kind of kept going.
And you've been doing it for a number of years now, very successful. If you are watching this video and you haven't subscribed to Doug yet, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button. It is some of the best videos on Age of Sigmar and in other games as well. I think that point you just made was perfect, and that is around the purpose of today, and the focus of today is very much going to be around the lore of Age of Sigmar. And I know, Doug, yourself, you've probably been in a very similar situation where we're hearing a lot of things like there's not a lot of lore in Age of Sigmar. Warhammer Fantasy, has all the lore, and Age of Sigmar is just pretzels and beers, or it's not as not as interesting, but a lot has happened over the last couple of years. We're entering almost year 5 of Age of Sigmar, and a lot has happened. So I thought this would be a good discussion that we could have around the world. Let's explore the world. Let me understand, like, if I'm coming back from Warhammer Fantasy, if I'm someone who's like, look, I've just got I'm just a player. I don't read the books. How do I understand the world is really what I'd like from today.
For sure. Yeah. That's a fantastic way to start. And I actually get it frequently. What I would say is there's 2 ways to approach it. You can either like try to go backwards in time and catch up with like all the developments, or you can just cannonball into where we are now in the story. And there's no real wrong answer to that one. I have a playlist on my channel that I want to direct folks to. If you go like to my main channel, it literally says just start here. And it's just stuff to get you caught up with the main story arc. But as far as like your question, as far as like, where does someone start? I would definitely say if you want to start from the beginning, the Realm Gate Wars was a really cool campaign series that really fleshed out a lot of stuff. And then if you want to just jump right in, Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds is a killer book, like just straight up.
There's some awesome books, and I think we'll get to a bit more about resources a bit later.
Oh, for sure,
No, that's a really good start. And guys, if your Google foo is not that strong, after this show is over, I will link that playlist over so you guys can start getting across how to get started in the Mortal Realms. Because certainly, if it wasn't as robust, Doug, I don't know how you would have lasted 4 or 5 years of making videos almost on a daily basis on literally nothing, because it is deep, it is rich. And now is a great time to get involved, whether it is with the stories that you make yourself, or just getting a part of the existing stories that Games Workshop's putting in front of us.
For sure. Yeah, it's a good time because we're kind of in this this like good breathing period between chapters. They kind of, I don't know if you guys ever watched like Dragon Ball Z, but they have like these big sagas where it's like this is the main arc for this year basically, and then the next one and so forth. So we're kind of in the middle of one of those, which is awesome because it makes it really easy to onboard.
So let's maybe start very high level. Let's imagine I'm getting into Age of Sigmar, or maybe I'm a Warhammer Fantasy player who is now thinking about dipping my toes into the new world, which is Age of Sigmar. What is that high level overview story? Like, what is the Age of Sigmar? And what's that high level understanding I need to get before I kind of go a bit deeper?
Yeah. So the way I've explained to people is that in the end times, when there was a huge campaign for fantasy battles, Chaos won. And what Age of Sigmar is fundamentally the last, I guess, like refugees, remnants of light, of anything that's not chaos pushing back. The high level story is that chaos came into the mortal realms. There's basically a realm for each wind of magic. Games Workshop did a great video kind of explaining those. And chaos just swept through all of them. I mean, it was just a wildfire. And so all the good guys went and retreated in one realm, Azir, which is Magic of Heavens, and where Sigmar himself lives. And so the story arc is they come out of Azir with the point being to retake the realms back for the good guys. One thing that is really interesting perspective-wise, and it was in the Slaves to Darkness battle tome, is that we're seeing all these books come out for order armies, so good guys, and they're all kicking tail and they're all amazing. And then the perspective is that we get from that battle tome is like, but those are just pinpricks of light in a sea of darkness. Like, all intents and purposes, chaos is still winning. But the story is us just pushing back a little bit. And so the first year of AOS was a campaign series called the Realmgate Wars, which was the re-entry of the good guys back into all the other realms. And it was cool. They had some really awesome characters. There was some cool stuff that, frankly, I didn't see Fantasy Battles do a lot. And by that, I mean there's a specific character named Torglug, who's a Nurgle leader who finds redemption and becomes a good guy. And stuff like that. Like there's character development and that kind of thing. And then the series that we're kind of in right now, which is called, it goes by a few names, but Malign Sorcery or Soul War, something like that. It's not just good guys and bad guys fighting for the realms. There's also two other factions. There's Destruction, which is all orcs and goblins and ogres and all these things that just want to not have any masters. So they hate chaos, but they also hate the good guys because they want to tell them how to live their lives. And then there's Death, which is Nagash, who just thinks that he should be in charge. And so the current arc we're in right now is, so the first year was good guys versus bad guys, order versus chaos. And then the second year is Nagash saying, I don't want either of you in charge. And so he makes a power play that has big implications on the realms. And so that's the current thing right now is Death is ascendant. And everybody else, all the other three ones, Order, Chaos, Destruction, are all on the back foot trying to reel with what Nagash is doing.
It's interesting because, when you start reading the stories in the early days of Age of Sigmar, when everyone was fighting back against Chaos, you'd probably imagine that someone like Nagash, who is the Lord of Death, would be on the side of Chaos and trying to fight, Sigmar and Alariel and all the different, good guys. Well, first off, Order isn't good.
Yes,
order
absolutely.
Is order is not good. And it's fascinating when you start reading stories. I'll never forget the story there was a little kind of season of campaign called the Malign Portents.
Yep.
We'll talk a bit more later, but I'll never forget this story where there was these two generic humans. They're free guilds. The generic humans, I think it was like a dad and a son. The son was of age, like a fighting age. And I think maybe they were like, dad was a bit sick. And I remember to this day, they were trying to defend their house. I believe it was against Nurgle, or it might be Nurgle corruption. And they had a little crossbow kind of defending their little house. And the Stormcast came in, and you'd imagine the Stormcast would come in and help the humans. Yes. But actually, they came in and destroyed the father and son because they had been cursed by Nurgle. And in the minds of the Stormcast, they're getting rid of that disease. But if you were good, you probably would have tried to have saved as many humans as possible, no matter what their stance was. And I think for me, that was when I'm like, Stormcasts aren't good. It's just in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Which Vince Vincella hates, by the way. I'm just going to throw that out there.
The eye of the beholder?
He hates the moral gray. Yeah.
It's fascinating, right? Because, I did come from the Warhammer Fantasy days, and the Empire, at least for me, was good, right? I've got the Realm of Chaos at the top of me. I've got the Beastmen trying to attack Kislev. The Empire is at last, defenders. And if they break through the Empire, they're going to hit Bretonnia. They're going to hit, the Wood Elves. So they were always good. But it's really great now. Nagash could be the good guy. And in some justifications, you're probably looking at, you know what? You've been screwed over a little bit. And Sigmar's actually the bad guy. So it's. I think that's what makes the narrative so fascinating, and we all bring a different perception to the realms.
Totally.
And
there's a lot going on faction to faction. So like Yeah, order does not mean good. It just basically means you are against chaos, which is kind of the only unifying thing for some of these little sub factions. One thing I like is I was actually talking to my friend Shu, who's on Rerolling Ones, and we were talking about the different factions where so you have on one end order, on the other end chaos, but then you have death and destruction, and death is fundamentally, it is an order faction. If you think about it, it's just the Nagash's order. Like it's just it's one mind who wants to have, you know, total from top down control, domination, and has his vision. So it is order. It's very structured. It's just, you know, single management. Whereas destruction as a grand alliance, it does teeter towards the chaosy side by throwing down kings and emperors and all those kinds of stuff and being wild, but they don't want to be dominated like chaos wants to dominate things. And so everyone kind of has these different shades of other factions that are really, really interesting. And then how some of those individual armies play within that is actually quite, it's awesome. It's just really cool stuff.
Yeah, super fascinating. And I think that's why I wanted to do this video. It's like, it is rich, it is detailed. You know, if you are watching this live or you watch it very early, you know, many of us are going to be spending time at our house right now for obvious reasons. So this is a good time to be going out and exploring the world, you know, picking up a battle tome and looking at the stories, picking up an audio book. And there's a lot you guys can kind of really dig into to understand that narrative. So, okay, that's the high level story, and we can kind of dig deep into a lot more of it. And let's do it. No, that's great because again, you know, I get a lot of people who ask me about, you know, they're coming from Total War and they want to understand, you know, well, that's kind of Warhammer, but this is different. Like how do they all kind of come about? There are some similar characters and some of them are very different. So I guess the next question I wanted to ask was around the milestones. Is like, you know, well, we've talked, you know, this very, very deep breadth of stuff that happened. What are some of those key milestones that I might want to learn about? You know, for me as a generic human free guild player, one that was very important to me was something called the Season of War, which was this like global fighting narrative that we all participated in. And off the backs of that, the results dictated the narrative, and we actually got what is now the Cities of Sigmar because Order won. And we were able to kind of clear the hordes and build some cities without chaos kind of stopping us. So that's just one of the stories. I think what are some of the other milestones that maybe I need to know about?
Well, piggybacking off that, one thing I want to touch on is when we think of the Seasons of War campaign, a lot of people are like, oh, these is like Cities of Sigmar because it's the cities that were in that campaign, which is true. At the same time, however, like I think the clearest one-to-one result of that campaign was that Tzeentch gained ascendancy, because the idea was order was triumphant, and because they, you know, stood the test of time, instead of frontal assaults by like Khorne, it was the insidious stuff that got into the cities from the bottom up. And so it was actually in their battle tome, it was the kind of direct follow-up to that campaign, which was super rad. As far as Seasons of War, that was a big one because that's when Alariel came back. She came back, and then the campaign series started where you could use her, which was awesome. Beyond that, other big ones, Malign Portent was a huge one, where basically Nagash's power play that we talked about before, where he didn't want to be owned by anybody, was to build a giant black pyramid made out of like solidified death magic. And he was basically going to kill everyone and then resurrect them under his will at once. And so he would just have this instant amazing army and be able to fight chaos and push them back because demons wouldn't be affected. And so that was his plan. It kind of backfired because Skaven got involved, and it only kind of worked to where it didn't kill everybody, but it did raise a bunch of ghosties and zombies and skeletons all over the realms everywhere. And so people who were like the furthest possible distance from Nagash still felt the effects of it. It's kind of the unifying thing that every battle tome now has, what Nagash's actions did to them specifically. And that's kind of a cool narrative device. I'll talk about that in a second, but that's how we got the Night Haunt, that the entire army came up at once.
Because before that particular story arc, Nighthaunt didn't have a battle tome. They were they had like the spirit host. They had some just generic you know, units. we had no characters. There was no Linda. And I remember that they brought out 4 models, one unique model per Grand Alliance. You know, you had the Fungoid Cave Shaman, you had the Lord Ordinator for Stormcast, you had that Dark Oath War Queen for Chaos. It was just those, and it was the Knight of Shrouds. It was just awesome, right? And then we got to play through some stories and some campaigns, and
and that was an underappreciated campaign book. I'm just gonna throw it out there. I think it was the coolest freaking thing, because at the time, so many factions did not have battle tomes. Like, it wasn't until the following year where GW, I don't know, went on a cocaine bender and then pumped out every codex for 40k and every battle tome for Age of Sigmar. But this campaign book allowed armies that don't have faction abilities to be able to do stuff like that, which was really neat. There's whole mechanics about like scrying the future and how you can use. Did you ever play that?
Yeah, I did. One of my very close friends, Deke. I've known him since primary school. We've been playing Warhammer since then. He is a death. He's the Lord of Death for me. He owns probably about 20,000 points worth of death. He's been painting death since the 90s. But we got to play some of those stories, and it was really, really cool to play out those stories. It was the first introduction of a pseudo command point army, but there was also very, very interesting battle plans that we could play through. It was highly enjoyable. I don't know if they still sell it anymore, but it's very, very, very good.
It is. It's especially if you want to have a fun weekend, just have everyone bring like a Grand Alliance whatever army. Take whatever you want, bring some cool full models, and then use that, and you can all still have cool abilities. One of my favorite, I call it a favorite with an asterisk next to it, memorable moments in wargaming, is that we were playing that with the Rerolling Ones guys, and I was playing Tzeentch at the time. I used my Destiny dice. I got a 12-inch charge, turn 1, and then Jack made me re-roll it with one of those portents. So and it was soul crushing. So not only did I blow the 2 6s in my Destiny dice pool.
No sympathy for Tzeentch. Sorry.
Yeah, nah. Well, that's fair.
You should have saw that coming.
Yeah. Oh, well. This is not the time to look for a Tzeentch pity, I suppose. But that was like 6 armies ago for me, so I don't really worry about it. It's old news.
But you've had the Season of War, you've had the Malign Portents. Obviously, we're almost coming out of this Soul Wars kind of narrative as well, which has unlocked all these amazing artifacts from Malign sorcery. There's obviously at least stuff that's happened by unlocking the Soul Wars, and it almost feels like we're kind of coming out of that now. Almost like Archaon is now kind of becoming the big bad guy instead of Nagash. He's kind of taking a back seat. Maybe has to replan his next approach.
I honestly hope so, because we've spent maybe like a year with like Death being ascendant, and it gets kind of repetitive a little bit sometimes. Sometimes it does, because when he comes into an area, everything's just dead, barren, and there's no life happening whatsoever. So it's like, well, you can only describe that times before people are like, okay.
He's trying to take over with the Legions of Nagash. Then we've had the Nighthaunt Rising with Alinda and that Mortar. And now he's gotten really super cranky that Sigmar keeps stealing his souls, and he's now like, that's it, screw you guys. I'm bringing out the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, my version of the Stormcast, and it's almost like, if this doesn't work, maybe you need to take a back step and rethink your plan.
Actually, that's Forbidden Power was another story beat that was really important, where basically after Nagash's failed spell, it accidentally revealed the fact that Sigmar had like weapons and weapon caches and artifacts hidden everywhere. And in one of them, he had imprisoned the soul of one of Nagash's favorite generals. So the Forbidden Power story arc is basically a military campaign led by the Nighthaunt to go get him. They broke him out, and then all of a sudden, that's when we got the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, that's their leader, is Catacross. So yeah, it was cool.
That's very cool. And there's so many stories here, but I think, just highlighting just some of the few large narratives that have happened, and me being a Gloomspite Gift player as well, we started to see the Bad Moon rising, and we started to steal
The Bad Moon was that was that was my favorite army release.
It was amazing, right? But like the Bad Moon kind of started tapping into Slanesh. We have Slanesh, who has previously been bound and now kind of been freed. And which is now leading into the Elves release. And, there's, within that, Marathi has her own little story about stealing some of the souls of more than her share of the Elves. We've obviously got the Deepkin. So there are these, as we keep kind of going deeper and deeper, there's just so much story that you can unlock.
For sure. And then what's cool is in all the battle tomes, and the main publications, Black Library kind of stuff, they often throw out these little threads of lore that they circle back to later, and it makes it really interesting because what they're doing is seeding the ground for like directions they can go, which is really great and it's smart. So they did the same thing for 40K forever ago, and they're doing the same thing now.
No, that's awesome. So we've talked a little bit about the realms. So you've got Akshi, you've got Shimon, you've got Gairan, you've got Hish. There's just lots. There's a lot going on there, and there's 8 of them that we need to know. 7 are playable. So if you are playing Age of Sigmar already and you've got Malign sorcery, you would know that there are artifacts and spells for 7 of the 8 realms, and 1 is off limits. That's Sigmar, where he lives.
Yes,
that's a very gated community. It's like it's like those gated communities, like you have a whole pass. No, you can't come in here. Sorry,
I love it.
The nice pools are off limits for you.
Yeah.
How would you best describe the mortal realms and these different particular? Are they planets? Are they balls of energy?
So the way it's best described, so Games Workshop put out a video of their own with Phil Kelly talking about it. He's like their lead lore nerd there and all around avatar of Doug. So basically what it is if you're familiar with what edition of D&D was it, where there was like disc realm or
third.
Yeah, so it's like Discworld type things.
I feel like I played in the Discworld in like 3.5 D&D.
Okay, so and honestly, it's the same idea where each realm represents a wind of magic. They all have every biome, meaning every one of them has forests and snowy mountaintops and lakes and all this kinds of stuff. But they're all kind of perceived differently through those different iterations of like, what does a mountain look like in the realm of fire? Well, it's not just lava and volcanoes and all that kind of stuff.
So like I imagine, like for example, in the realm of metal, does that mean that Sylvaneth's not there? No, my interpretation of that is maybe they're more metallic. Maybe, they shoot super sharp spikes and made of gold and silver as opposed to bark and natural kind of pieces.
Yep. And there's actually, in some of you kind of get little hints of what each of these realms looks like if you read the little fluff blurb for the Realmscape features. So, for example, like in the realm of metal, there is trees that can cut you as you move through them. So if you move through terrain, you can get hurt and that kind of stuff.
To be fair, regular trees cut me.
Fair enough, yeah,
But they're even more cutting.
It's more of a user error than the realm trying to kill you, though.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, that's what they fundamentally are. Now, they are, like I said, a disc. And what it is in the center, things are extremely stable, and that's where most of the story things happen, is frankly the fat center of that sucker. Because as you get towards the edge, things get much more wild and crazy. Magic starts to kind of come apart at the seams. It's less refined out there. So, for example, if you're in the realm of fire and you start walking towards the edge, if you get far enough, you can burst into flames. There's like gold statues of people in Chaman because it literally just turned them into a different metal. All kinds of stuff. So, and it's a cool setting because it's, first of all, each of them is massive, like beyond each one of those is supposed to be like a whole old world unto itself. The maps that we have in the core book account basically for one continent in each of the realms. So we don't have a full picture of every single one of them, which is, I think it's a great compromise between abstract and too much detail to limit yourself. And so, yeah, that's what it is. And so each one of them has unique artifacts that really represent or are supposed to represent the realm that they're from. And in addition to that, I'm trying to think.
And that's why just going back to the early discussion that we had around the Realmgate Wars, that was one of the reasons why the very first story arc was all about fighting for these realm gates, because that is how you were able to transport between the different realms. And through the successes of capturing certain realm gates, trade was able to be created. And that's why places like Hammerhall, which is known as the Twin City, has a realm gate which allows them to be in Akshi as well as Gairan. So, and that's why when you play that army, you do have the selection of being from both, because the city is in both. And by being in that realm, it allows you to access so much and do so many things.
Yeah, and it was really fleshed out well in the Carriage and Overlords book, I think. Maybe it's a Cities of Sigmar book, but basically what each realm offers. So, for example, if you are having a massive war effort, you need raw metal. There's a realm of metal. You also need to feed your troops, and people go to Gur because there's lots of wildlife to kill and then bring the meat in. And so they all kind of work together. There's a reason to be in every one of them. And of course, if you're someone who doesn't like that concept, you can just say you're from the center of the realm where things are just chill, where it's very stable and just pick your own environment, basically.
Actually, that's actually a really good point as well. Just to loop back, we talked about the Age of Chaos, and how Chaos had really taken over the realms until Sigmar and crew fought back. The whole region that Kharadron overlords came into our realms is because they were living up in the skies and the skyports, going, screw you guys, we ain't coming down until it's safe and we want to trade. And then once the realms and the cities and we kind of got okay, they're like, cool, we're coming down now. So I think it's just like there's so much story and so many different things that have come out of this.
And I think to kind of touch on that, and we've kind of talked around it a little bit in the various things we've mentioned, but what it took them quite a while, frankly, maybe 2-3 years. They created this really abstract setting with the realms, and it was largely rejected when it first got put out there as too crazy. It's too much of a sandbox.
Things like god beasts, and there was lots of just different.
And I always understand that. The thing is that they've done a really good job of about a year in going forward is the realms start to make a lot more sense the more you learn about the various factions, because when you have this huge stage, it's putting characters on that stage that give it context. And so like having all these different realms doesn't matter until you realize, oh, the realm gates are important because we need things from each one of them. Or how society like functions when you have transportation. Like you said, in Hammerhall, like they can go between two realms. That's huge.
Another example that comes to my mind is the Stormcast. There was a particular chamber, and look, to be honest with you, my Stormcast lore is not that strong, so please don't punish me. But I know that there's a particular chamber or a particular part of the Stormcast who went out scouting in the realm of beasts, the realm of Gur, and they got lost, or Sigmar wasn't listening to their calls, and as you can imagine, as they spent more and more time in Gur, they became more and more bestial. So you started to see those effects come into play.
Yeah, and that's been a recurring theme in a couple, mostly battle tomes, and I haven't seen a Black Library novel that I feel like really drives it home. But the longer you stay in a realm, the more it changes you. So if you're in Akshi, you become very hot-tempered and aggressive. You become feral, like you said in Gur, and it's mental changes, but also physical. So like my favorite is the Flesh Eater courts, who grow like huge manes and fur and that kind of stuff if they're in Gur for too long. There's an Ossiarch Bone Reaper lady who like goes hog wild. Her people go nuts when they fight. I think it's the Ivory Host or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. But look, you're the lore master. I'll just believe you, and I'm sure Games Workshop will be writing ideas, and they're like, "Oh, Doug said this. Let's put this in the next battle zone."
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's because I said.
I'm pretty sure we got to that point.
So the realms are really cool. They allow you to do a lot of storytelling because you can make whatever you want. Because the story arc is that things were really groovy, and we had this technological and civilization peak right before chaos came in. There's tons of ruins to explore, which is my favorite. That's why I like Mordheim, where you're like crawling through the ruins of the city. All that kinds of stuff,
and that's the setting of Underworlds, really, which happened into some of these ruins. Season 1 was around Shadespire, which was this 7 layers under Shaish. But there is and that's why we just keep getting unlocking different things and different stories, and It's just never ending. It just keeps going, and there's
Yep.
just we've kind of only just touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and it's a very quick overview, but
I mean, it's only 5 years of stories, right? Like we're only 30 minutes in, so I think we're doing a pretty good job to kind of condense it all. But again, there's so much story. The reason that Slaanesh was being bound was obviously because the 4 elven gods at the time had kind of bound Slaanesh in between light and shadow. And then you drill into that, and there's more and more and more and more and more, and that's how we got fish elves.
So it's a very tangled web, but for people who say there's no lore, it's like the second you pull one of these threads and you're like, what happened to Slaanesh? It takes you down this like super long rabbit hole that you're like, now we have the Deepkin, now we have Snake Ladies for Daughters of Cain, now we have Lumineth, which are coming out here theoretically soon, assuming that the world epidemic doesn't slow things down for them. All these things that, like, if you just pick one thread, which is my suggestion to new folks, if you're coming back into it, just pick one thing and ask about it, and it'll lead you down the ultimate rabbit hole. If you're coming back to the game and you're like, what the hell are Stormcast? Just look up Stormcast and you'll learn about Sigmar and Grugni and Azir and I don't know, all kinds of stuff.
The one thing that really benefited me was coming from the old world to this new Age of Sigmar is that the 8 realms are basically the winds of magic.
Yes.
Being an Empire player, I would always have wizards, and in my city, which was Althoff at the time, it always is Althoff, it had the College of Magic, and they were always studying the winds of magic, and it is Ger, Hish, Shimon, all of those. It's literally the same thing, but it's really, instead of it being this kind of, we don't understand it, magic is just coming from somewhere, they've really now explored that out and built it out, and there's just so much richness in this that
for sure.
I want to talk to you next about the Chaos Gods. Like there are gods. The gods aren't the old world gods. It gets even more convoluted and kind of tangled. And
that's a hard one because like I don't. So for folks who don't know me, I played Fantasy Battles for about 8 months before Age of Sigmar launched. So like, I was reading books about my high elves, but I didn't know anything about like all the old world gods. And so I'm seeing these names in these books, and then like I don't know who that is. I only know the Age of Sigmar ones. But what was your question about the other gods? We can jump into that.
Before I move into that, really quickly, War Soren in the chat has asked a really good question. That's perfectly timed now, and then we'll go to that question. And he was talking about, he believes that, and he's seen a lot of influence from Hish around, a very Asian themed kind of aesthetic. He was wondering, what do you believe that maybe Azir might look like? Do you think there's a particular look for the realms, or do you think that's coming out from like a battle tome or an army point of view?
My cynical side says that since Sigmar runs the whole thing, it's probably going to be like a historic German town. He's got everything's just like Dusseldorf or whatever. Just pick
Sign me up. Sign me up. Pantaloons, mustaches,
exactly. Yeah,
that sounds like where I want to be.
Schnitzel buffets. Yeah. No, but as far I would definitely think it would be. Yeah. Not too far off from that, but I guess like maybe like a classic European theme, because the stuff that came out of there, well, it's kind of a melting pot because all the races went there when things hit the fan with chaos. So I don't know if it would be like, Germantown with like kind of how like like exactly where like New York City has Chinatown. Maybe the default is like a German themed or European themed thing with like Elven Town, where it's like that little bit of Asian influence, that kind of stuff in that area, because like they do in Hish. But yeah, so I don't know. That'd be my guess.
We did see that kind of come into play with Death, with Neferata recreating Lamia as new Lamia. So she obviously came from the world that was the realm of myth, and they had Lamia. But she wanted to recreate her vision of what Lamia looked like in New Age of Sigmar, and that is new Lamia. So who knows? It could be.
That's my wild guess. Is probably something pretty classic to Empire.
Well, Well, in the spirit of community, I'd like people in the channel description or the channel comments to tell us what they think of what Hish looks like. Or Azir, sorry. What does Azir look like? What is their personal Azir?
Yeah,
this could get interesting.
Just a giant codpiece manufacturing plant is all that whole realm is. Just equipping every free guild guy with a crotch guard.
Sign me up. I'd be down with that. Give me all the pantaloons for days.
Yes.
But speaking of the gods, we've got a bunch of gods. You've kind of named some of them already. So we've got Sigmar, which is the game's named about him, right?
Yep. Yeah. Age of Sigmar it began when he decided to go out and reclaim the realms. So to make it really brief, during the End Times campaign, many of the prominent characters like Teclis and Sigmar, or not Sigmar, but Karl Franz with Sigmar in his soul, I don't know, all tied themselves to winds of magic, and then they became gods in AOS. And so, Sigmar is god of heavens, Alariel's god of life, so life magics and growths and that kind of stuff. We have Malekith, who is kind of the non-copyright infringing version of What is he?
Malachi?
No, sorry. Yeah, Malekith is the old one. Malarian is his new name, right? Okay, I got that backwards.
Sorry, I do it all the
time. And then who else is there? Tyrion and Teclis. We don't know too much about them, but they're both around. They have some relationship to being gods of light magic. Whether they kind of twin that one or if one is more dominant, I don't know how that works yet. Lumineth is coming out. We're going to figure it out soon. And then who else is there? There's the Dwarden gods of Grugni and Grimnir.
Got Gorkamorka.
Gorkamorka, yep, who can split into Gork and Mork and then recombine into Gorkamorka when he argues with himself. Who else is there?
We've got Nagash.
Yep.
Alariel.
Yeah, is that her? I think that's the main players, at least that we see now. And then the Chaos Gods are the same as they were. So Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, Tzeentch. They kind of elevated the Great Horned Rat.
Yeah. Everyone always forget the Great Horned Rat because in the old world, the Great Horned Rat was never a Chaos God. And as soon as Slaanesh got kind of bound up and ate too many elves and got really fat and got captured, they're like, oh, we don't want to be a threesome. Let's just promote the rat. And then the rat has used the last couple of years to go, I'm still a god. I'm still a god. And most people forget about the poor Great Horned Rat. But you could probably argue, is it a god? Is it not a god? But you got that pantheon of chaos.
Well, speaking of that question of is he's a god or is not, the one thing I do think that I would love to see from Games Workshop is some kind of clarification on what makes someone a god. Because all those people we just mentioned have achieved, deity status, right? But then there's this next tier of people who are trying to become them, where you have like Archaon. But when you see Archaon, it is like the power of a god brought to the battlefield. It is insanity. Another one is Morathi, who is Malekith Myrtlearian. His mom from the old world did survive, but she got twisted up in the pursuit of life, and so now she is trying to attain godhood herself. So that kind of like, we don't really know what the distinction is because there's such movers and shakers that it's not really clear. But there's different tier. Like you have your deities, what I'm calling demigods, and then a lot of people below them,
like us.
Yes, exactly.
Well, not me, not you. You're
exactly.
Certainly like the Morathi kind of demigod ascending to be God.
I'm hot on her tail. That sounded worse when it came out of my mouth. There you go. Just put that as a sound clip. Morathi, Doug's hot on her tail. Okay.
This is not your mom, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But like for me, what I love about this is when I pick up and I go to Games Workshop and I pick a bunch of models up. Mm-hmm. They are literally models. They're pieces of plastic men and women that I need to put together and I'm going to paint in some description. They are a toy. But the moment you start putting a story over, you can start to see it in a little bit more of a different light, a different context. Yep. Colors come to mind, conversion and kit bashing comes to mind. And something that I often get asked about is how do you come up with ideas to kit bash and convert your armies? And the lore and the story and the narrative and the purpose of your plastic men and women soldiers creates that kind of it opens up Pandora's box to a realm of possibility. And you look at your little general and go, well, this is how the general comes about. But what if that general come from the realm of death? Would it look different? How would I make it reflect the realm of death? And all of a sudden, you know, your Hurricanum is surrounded by spirits from the Coven Throne.
Yeah.
You know, you have there's so many different things you can do just by one different lens on your army. So I guess the question I had for you is how important are the ongoing narratives and stories to your gaming and you know, the gaming community you're a part of?
Yeah, so you'll hear people say stuff sometimes. Like I've had a few people message me and be like, you know, the lore is secondary. It doesn't really matter. It's just kind of a bolt-on thing to the game. My shot back to that is simply that we all know games where the story is just crap. Like there's just nothing. It's like paper thin. But those games are not as interesting. And the reason is because the story, I'm going to get a little philosophical here. I believe that humans are storytellers by nature. Even if you are a hardcore competitive person, when you win, you go on a podcast and you talk about how you won, which is itself a story. You make a story. Like that's all it is. When it comes to these kinds of games, adding, you know, personalization, your own touch, your own vision to a greater story arc is super rewarding in a way that no other hobby does, which is why I think wargaming is around. You know, I think it's why it exists. And there's a lot of like different lenses with that, but when it comes to like a list building competitive, it doesn't matter. But what the fact is, you use these narrative tools, these huge sandboxes that you get in terms of the realms and where people come from, meaning your example of your general who's from the realm of death, but also where he is now. So how does someone who was grown up in the grim darkness of the world of death act when he is now in the realm of life? You know, with everything being flush, and that creates internal conflicts with him. And he has to use this new environment to his advantage when he fights and that kind of stuff. So it adds drama to these little plastic soldiers and kind of gets us attached to them.
Yeah, no, I love it. And, you know, you at the start of this year, you created a little story competition. And unfortunately, you know, due to life, I didn't get to actually submit my final result. But one of the things that I wanted to focus on, and I did to a degree, was at the time of your launch, you had set it up when we were playing at CanCon. So CanCon is the world's largest Sigmar event. And Clint Mallet, who is the TO of CanCon, had set it in the realm of Gairan. So it was in the Jade Kingdoms. So I thought to myself, you know, being at the time I was playing Hallowheart, and I'm like, why is my Hallowheart army coming to Gairan? And what was the purpose? What am I trying to do? And, you know, when I looked at my list and I was thinking about, well, my general is going to be an anointed on foot, a little elf, and it's leading a bunch of wizards. And protecting those wizards is the Phoenix Guard, and there's a whole bunch of other things. But I'm like, what's this personal narrative? And I'm thinking about, well, where am I basing myself? And, you know, looking at the book, I decided to pick a point in the map of, you know, I'm happy to share my lore with anyone who wants to ask. But you know, just to summarize where I got to, I recognized and realized that basically my army was a research army. They were going into the Jade Kingdoms. You know, my general and my Phoenix Guard were protecting these researchers that were hopefully bringing back artifacts for Hallowheart to research, to explore, to understand the realm of Gairan better, being in, you know, the realm of Akshi.
Yeah.
And hopefully through this quest, I was able to do X, Y, and Z. And as I reflect on my games, I can then put that into context. Whether I won, whether I lost, whether it was a raid, whether it was an ambush, whether it was a hard fight, all of a sudden I'm like, my tournament performance, while I did go 4-2, adds so much more flavor because I now have a story that's attached to it, not just I went to a tournament and won and lost.
And I think that background that you made is a perfect example of what I would encourage most folks to do. You don't need to have every single frickin' garrote have a name and a background and you know, a family tree, but saying, I mean, I like your example of having a research team and people who guard them, because that's a super practical, very easy to mentally grasp thing. And it kind of helps you ground yourself in what could be a very abstract setting. Because when AOS first came out, people, I think they kind of dove really heavy into the super weird stuff. Like
it's very high fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. And they kind of thought that was kind of the norm. But it's like, no, I think it started when Cities of Secrets came out, that like, no, there's still some very grounded storytelling that's very much like the old world, fantasy battles, if that's what you're into, that it just makes sense. Like, if societies existed here, we would have research teams just like we have research teams now. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that was a great one.
And there's out there to help you do this. But I think for me, like, picking a point in the Mortal Realms and thinking about why I'm doing what I'm doing has just added so much more color and variety and enjoyment to my games, on top of still wanting to win, but it contextualizes the losses as well.
For sure, yeah. And some of the entries that I got for that competition were really just people saying like, hey, I recorded all the games I did for the month of October, and this is the story around it. And so they started with this. Here's a character. Here's my army. And then it's like, and then we went out to fight, and we were swamped by flesh eater courts. And they just talked about their battle with flesh eater courts. And so, win or lose, you are crafting a narrative, and then you just go the extra step and define some characters and that kind of stuff, and you can have a really great time. It adds a lot to the game.
Yeah, and most armies, if not all armies, are across all the different realms. Now, probably the only armies that are locked into a particular realm are those cities of Sigmar, because those particular cities, but not to say that you couldn't use the rules as sister cities somewhere else.
For sure.
But each of these armies, Sylvaneth can be found everywhere. Noble can be found everywhere. Khorne, obviously, some of these armies have preference to where they want to be, but you can put your own spin on your own army. And just because, again, Gairan is all about Nurgle and Sylvaneth, doesn't mean that you have to play from Gairan and it has to be in that scheme. Absolutely,
yeah. So one of the things they've done a really great job of, if you want ideas on where your army could be from, if you have your battle tome, I would definitely say just breeze through those like little story blurbs that they have. Like usually they call it like, I don't know, orcs over time or something like that. It's just like little, like, I don't know, maybe 4-sentence story bits. And they have things from all over every realm for every book. And they're all over the place. Sometimes they have sub-factions that are kind of tied narratively to specific realms. I like doing that personally. And then some armies are so big that they are just everywhere. Iron Jaws are orcs in general, war clans are everywhere. Stormcast they're such a large faction that they can break down into divisions, and like, this chamber will send a division here, and then the rest of the divisions will go there. So you can create whatever you want.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty as well. I was talking to someone just the other day when they're like, I want to set up a Nighthaunt army and I want them to focus on their mortal enemy. Who is their mortal enemy? And we're talking about different things, and one could be the Sacrosanct Chamber from Stormcast. Another one could be Revenge for Archaon and the Chaos when they invaded and they took over the Realm of Death. And they banished Nagash for a period of time. So you could create like this revenge force, and then what does an anti-chaos Nighthaunt look like? And it just unlocks so many cool opportunities. And then you create your own story, you create your own battles. And the cool thing in talking about battle tomes is that all of the battle tomes have custom battle plans for you to play about your army. So, Moonsplat Git one has one around the Bad Moon, and it's not like the General's Handbook. It's its own unique story, and you can explore it and explore the personal army narrative.
Yeah, I do suggest everyone take a good hard look, because I'll be honest, some of those missions are better than others, but all of them are meant to really drive home like the theme of the army, what's in the book, basically. So like my favorite one is the Beast of Chaos, where everyone's just trying to tear down the Herdstone, which is just like a really cool thing. And then so it puts the main army as sort of a ambusher, but defending it, like they're watching the other army come at them. And so there's some really cool stuff there. But yeah, those missions it's kind of like the Path to Glory thing. Most people just skip right past it, but like there's some cool stuff in there for sure.
Speaking of stories, one of my favorite stories you just mentioned earlier was the Cities of Secrets, which was all about Zench starting to corrupt one particular free city, and it was the fight back of a witch hunter, a warrior priest. There was like a little band of brothers, essentially trying to who is the cult, who's corrupting, and kind of fight it off from the realms. Do you have any particular favorite stories or any particular books that you really enjoyed that you kind of recommend to people?
Sure. So if someone is coming from fantasy battles and they are really apprehensive about like the abstract, crazy, heroic fantasy stuff, Cities of Secrets by, I think it's Nick Horth who wrote that one. That is my go-to book for people because it is a very understandable story. It doesn't have there's a Stormcast in it, but he's not one of the main characters. Everyone's very understandable. It's very like old worldy because it's a concrete setting. So that's high on my recommendation list.
I really enjoyed that, by the way, because the way they looked at the Stormcast is not like they're the saviors. They're like, oh, here they go again. The Stormcast, they're here for all the glory. They think they're so good. And I mean, with my little pike and my halberd, I'm going to protect the city. I don't need them. And it made them not feel like the good guys.
Right. Right. They're this other thing. It's kind of like I think if you're a 40K player, like I think the best stories about Space Marines are the ones that kind of highlight how not human they are. And they do the same thing with Stormcast in that one, where it's like nobody wants to talk to them because they're scary, like they're different, and that's not cool. Other books that are really standouts. My personal favorite of all the Black Library books is Nagash, Undying King by Josh Reynolds. It is a book where as you mentioned before, Nagash got taken out of action by Archaon. He got struck down, but not destroyed. And so he's kind of like in a hole, resting somewhere. And what is his name? Archon the Black and Neferata are doing their best to keep him kind of hidden and safe. But a Nurgle army, which is full of character, like it's one of the most fun things to read if you like Nurgle or just chaos in general, is marching towards that hidden place. And so they're trying to like scramble all the human defenders to come together. And I won't spoil the ending, but it is beyond rad. It's everything you've ever wanted to see Nagash do. So beyond that, that's my biggest recommendation. I
know that 8 Leminations is a great series as well.
Yeah.
Again, Josh Reynolds is probably my favorite author. I'm sorry, the other authors in Age of Sigmar, but Josh Reynolds' writing style is just so good.
Yeah, he does a great job of, you know how like I've only ever heard it called bolter porn in 40K, where it's just action, right? Action, but not for the sake of anything. I feel like Josh Reynolds, anything by him is a fantastic read because he does a great job, especially with dialogue, of just making things seem important and like adding importance to things. When I say add importance, I just mean like the violence is never just for violence sake. It's always moving a very important and interesting story along. So I definitely recommend anything by him. What else?
There are a lot of cool books, and check out the Black Library site. There's a Gloomspite one, which is awesome. They're not all about Storm and Death. There is Chaos ones. There is one I haven't read yet, which is around the Tithe of Bone, which is a short little story, as you can imagine, about Bone Reapers. But the great thing for me is I'm not the biggest reader. Like I read a lot of business books, and I'm all about my business world reading. But what I love to do is I love to listen to the audios, and the great thing is a lot of these books are in audio form as well. Well, when I'm walking, I'm at the gym, on the train, I can consume these books and catch up on stories as well as doing my business reading. So if you're more of an auditory kind of person, things like the Go Trek series as well is just awesome.
Yes. Also, so is the Call of Archaon series is actually one of my favorite things they've put together. It's a bunch of short stories, but it's from various Lords of Chaos who are all being pulled into service by Archaon and like how they have to fight against each other. That's definitely a good one. Hammer Hall and Other Stories is fantastic if you want to do Stormcast, because it's just a glimpse. It's a bunch of short stories that are glimpses at what they are like. Trying to think of a good destruction one. There's Gloomspite is probably the best one. They have not really leaned heavily into destruction as for characters and that kind of stuff as much. They kind of get shortchanged, and that's a real bummer.
By the way, the book that I really enjoyed from the 8 Lamination series it's called Spear of Shadows. So it was like a combination of a free guild person, it was a vampire, and it was a fire slayer, troll slayer. It was awesome. It's just, again, it's really cool. And like, again, you would like, why is a vampire working with these two? Well, it allows you to break the mold of the game, and it creates a wonderful story.
Yeah, there's some real cool stuff there. I pulled up the Black Library site because for some reason I'm having just an absolute brain fart right now about different titles of books. But there are quite a few. And what I normally tell people is, if you want to learn about the current story arc, pick up Soul Wars, because that's what's going on right now. If you want to learn about the opening stuff, I like Warstorm personally. It's the start of the Realmgate Wars. There's some really great dialogue in there about why realm gates are important and how the realms feel weird and different to people who are first coming to them. And then from there, just pick an army and then just find books about it. That's always my suggestion.
And the cheeky plug that I'm going to put in as well is that there's someone here on this channel who's actually recorded a whole bunch of videos as well. So even if you don't have the book, you are curious about the Bone Splitters, or you're curious about why is Archaon kind of rising to power, and what's this all about, and what's the deal with the Wrath of the Everchosen. There's somebody that's not me, maybe it's you, Doug, who's created these bite-sized videos that allows you to dip your toe in the water to learn enough. And if it sounds like there's something that interests you, then you can dive into the Black Library. You can read more in from the battle tomes, and I think that's, for me, that's the wonderful thing is that I don't own every battle tome, but through the likes of your videos, you can learn a little bit about everything. And then who knows, you are like me, and sometimes you listen to your stuff and I'm like, yeah, maybe I should start a naked baby fire slayer army. The way Doug puts it actually makes them sound real cool. They sound actually kind of cool. Like, now I understand why they're running around naked and why they have runes. That makes actually more sense.
Yeah, and so for folks who don't watch my channel, basically I really focus on battle tome lore specifically, like talking about the factions and that kind of stuff. I don't do a ton of actual Black Library book reading, and the reason for that, and it is a very intentional thing, is because I don't want to spoil things for folks. But what's nice is that if you were to go to my channel and learn about Sylvaneth, if you were to pick up Black Talon First Mark, which is a book that I did do a review of. But when they meet some Sylvaneth, you'll have some kind of context for it and what they're like and that kind of stuff. So that's always my goal. I don't want to be a spoiler, and I encourage people to go read these books, buy these battle tomes. But it's more about getting people understanding the characters at play rather than spoiling everything. If that makes sense.
I think, for me, like Age of Sigmar has been around almost 5 years, and we are just tipping the iceberg of the discussion, and hopefully so far it's gotten you a little bit curious about the Realmgate Wars, whether it's about the God Beasts and why they were important and how the Fire Slayers came about, or maybe it's something, maybe it's even just a little bit about a better appreciation, because sometimes when we get that new battle tome, we run straight to the points, we run straight to the war scrolls, the battalions, and there's this whole half of the book that is so rich in detail and lore that even gives you secrets on how to play the army. I know, when I read the stories about Manfred von Karstein, who is known as a coward, as someone who won't face you, 1-for-1, but he plays the same way as the stories. I don't run Manfred in the battle right in front. That's the role of the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. He's about being a calculated decision maker. He is about striking where the opponent is weak, and the lore tells me how to do that. And that is reflective not just of Manfred, but as I look at my different armies around how the Free Guild work, the cities work as regiments and supporting each other, as opposed to these little 1 and 2 man kind of units that just run up the board and rush.
Yeah, similarly, my Magakin of Nurgle is based around the Drowned Men, which is led by Gutrot Spoom, who's like a Nurgle pirate guy, and because he has ships that traverse basically land. He's all about like lightning strike fast attacks. So Gutrot allows Blight Kings to teleport into the battlefield. The Drowned Men stuff that we got in Wrath the Everchosen is all about making big fat fly boys, really fast. So it's like lightning strike Nurgle. I love it. It's my favorite. But yeah, those story things play right into it.
Yeah, and we've got the Lumineth coming as well. We've got the rumored, giants or the sons of Behemoth. So who knows what that's going to unlock. We can only imagine that, we're seeing one part of the Lumineth. What does the other side of the Elven brothers going to bring to the table? But then also, what was formerly the Dark Elves. And the story is constantly and rapidly evolving, and the way that people are interacting and being impacted by the rise of Slaanesh, the impacts of Archeon and, all the different little pieces. You can think about what that means to you and your force.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm interested. What's really cool about like learning learning about a faction. One of the best things, if you're someone who like is short on time, not a big fan of reading, read the specific section in your battle tome, now that they all have it, about how they responded to the Necroquake, which is like Nagash's big thing, because they created this one unifying event that every faction has a response to because it affected everybody. And in that, you will find like the rich personality of your army and how they handle problems, basically, and how we handle problems defines us a lot of the time. That'd be definitely my suggestion to you.
Yeah, no, love it. So I guess, one thing that I'd love to hear from you is what advice would you give somebody who is now getting across the lore a bit more, taking a bit more appreciation of the narratives and the stories, and then they want to start incorporating into their own army? Like, you've just given us a wonderful example of you and your drowned men. How did you get to that point? And how could I start doing that if I'm not there just yet?
Sure. What I would say is start big and then work your way smaller. By that, I mean, my drowned men started with, I want Nurgle pirates, because I think pirates are cool and I think Nurgle is cool. Mainly just because I am someone who likes to move as few models as possible. I don't have time for these 60 blocks of grots or whatever. So I wanted something more elite, and I was like, okay, but I want this nautical theme because I don't see it a whole lot outside of Deepkin, really. So I wanted to do that. And so you start looking around like, okay, what are some things that would add nautical flavor? So you can look at bits. So if you're a prominent kit basher, look at some of the nautical stuff. Go to the Deepkin site or bits stuff and then pull off some of their fishy bits, if you will, and just start crafting a narrative. What I would say, a lot of the armies in AOS, if you define the character of your general, everything else can reflect him, right? If your hero is brash and impulsive, they're going to want things that focus on lightning strikes, so cavalry and fast moving aggressive stuff. If they're more reserved and that kind of stuff, you might focus on being defensive. That's a great way to just kind of play into it, almost a slight bit of role play. I definitely start there, and then you can either go the route of because so some folks really value like how they play on a tabletop, so you can choose rules that really lean into that. So say you wanted to make we'll pick on you for a bit, right? So let's say you wanted to play Cities of Sigmar, and you want to play Cities of Sigmar, and you're like, I wanted these guys to be like rugged, outdoorsy guys on the forefront, like the frontier of a city's boundaries, kind of defending things. And they're light and fast. Okay, so you can either go with choosing a city based on rules that supplement that concept, or you can say, no, we're going to be Hallowheart because that's where I want to be. And then you choose units that are specific to that concept, and you can kind of work from there. I'd say like pick a theme, build a character, and then what would that character logically take to achieve their goal?
You've nailed the thinking pattern I've had with you. Like when you've just talked to me, I thought of two particular stories of my own list building. When I built my Flesh Eater Courts, I built it and I put my mind in the mindset of a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing character. And I built my general. And my general at the time, because this was before the second battle tome, so no Archregent, but I built a Ghoul King on foot. And what I had done was I'm like, well, reading the story of the Flesh Eater Courts, they think they are noble. They think they are essentially Bretonia, the Knights of the Realm.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I went out and bought a White King the little White King on foot, and I cut his head off, so I had the crown. All I wanted was the crown.
Oh, nice.
The crown on top of my archregent, or my Ghoul King, sorry, and I made him the king. And I also did some other bits to kind of make it more of a king. But I put him in that mindset, and I'm like, cool. How am I going to create my Terrorgeists and my zombie dragons more like my royal dragons? So I got like the breastplate of the Free Guild Griffin, and I put it across it with some heraldry. My ghouls have, I've got a musician ghoul and a banner bearer ghoul. I've got like little helmets that I've been able to steal from the 5th edition skeletons.
Rad.
So, and then like my flayers, I was able to create little standards and try to make them a bit more like knights. But that kind of starting with the general and going, cool, if I want my general to be more knightly, how would he look? Then on the other side is my Cities of Sigmar army. And I'm like, how do I own my own place in Cities of Sigmar? And I was looking at the map, and I'm like, I was drawn by Hallowheart, but Hallowheart wasn't the only army I really liked. And I'm looking at Tempest Eye. So they're the two armies that I really like. I'm looking at the map, and I'm like, oh, they're both from Akshi. Oh, actually, in the map, there's this little isle called the Opal Isle, and it sits in between both of those cities, but it's also the entry point into the plateau. So I'm like, how do I do this? So I created my own little city that sits kind of in the middle on that Opal Isle that can be a trading partner to both those cities. It could be a research arm for Hallowheart. It could be, it plays its own part to Tempest Eye. And then it, again, just kind of formulates, and just by pointing something on the map, I can now start to build that narrative. And then my battles become grudges or victories, and it means stuff for my army.
For sure, yeah. That's a great way to do it. Absolutely, yeah. Again, start with your general, and then it just kind of assume that their personality trickles down into everything that they would bring, which I think makes sense. Especially,
the other trick that I really enjoy is I go on and find name generators. So I know there's an Age of Sigmar. There's a gentleman, Jamie the Jasper, I think his name is, who's been putting up and creating these different name generators. But Dungeons and Dragons has a whole bunch as well. Like you just put on like fantasy name generator, and you can find almost anything. So putting a name on your army list submission, or just finding that name for me is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Naming stuff is awesome, and it's really fun when you use naming people as a reward for like ridiculous things. Like I have a named Stormcast guy that I kept from the Stormcast army that I sold, because he was, I use him in Warcry now, but he was a Vanguard guy, Vanguard hunter that like took out a Maw tribe boss with his little gun at 9 inches. I was like, yes, you get a name. That's awesome.
There's a gentleman in my games club, a very, very well-known Skaven player by the name of Dan Brewer, who loves to run clan rats. And what he does is with all of his opponents, he'll write under the base their name. So like we're all clan rats, or if we've done something heroic, we might be a Jezzail. And he's obviously got like hundreds of clan rats, but it's very cool to be able to create a little story. And I've got one little Free Guild soldier who pulled down a Maw Crusher once. So
funny.
It's like the last guy to die. Even if he's like he shouldn't be the first one. He shouldn't be he should be the guy to die. Nah, he's the hero of Free Guild. And to answer one of the questions in the chat as well, I think one of the cool things are that even though Cities of Sigmar is only really focused on 2 of the essentially 7 playable realms, there are stories in the realm of death where the humans are working in partnership with the spirits of their ancestors. So while there's no rules there, the Free Guild or the cities could be like, how does that interact? But then how does a bestial type Gur-based city look? Are they more barbarian? You use more of the maybe acolyte type bodies.
Yeah. I mean, there's this idea that like, because you're from someplace that you're stuck there, like, why would you have any reason to not fight in Akshi? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm from America. We got to have our fist up every country in the world. So you find a way.
They're everywhere. That's awesome.
Exactly. Which is not really a segue into politics talking, but you know what I mean? Like, there's reasons come up with one. There's perfectly good reasons that countries interact with each other.
And I think, again, going back to the whole purpose of the show is we've got a whole bunch of books that are going to inspire you to find that narrative. So even if you don't know why it's going to go yet, or you're looking for some stories, there are pre-written stories as much as you can write your own.
Totally. Yeah. And sadly, destruction players generally have to, because there's just not a lot of stories that involve them. But I feel like those are also some of the easier factions to have reasons to travel, because they're just looking for a fight, right? They just travel around.
Yeah. I think that's the easiest one, right? The Iron Jaws are out there looking for a fight.
Yep.
The Ogres are out there because they're hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, looking for food.
So a couple of listener questions I wanted to kind of spitfire at you.
Yes, please.
So this I'm very curious to see how you go with these ones.
Okay.
So this one comes from Redhead Joe. So his question is around the religion of the mortal realm. So his perception is that the religions are very fluid in the mortal realms. The law behind chaos kind of insinuates that people worship chaos in various ways. And some people may not be even aware that they're worshipping chaos.
Yes.
And then you've obviously got the worshipping of Sigmar, Gorkamorka, Nagash, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think there are ways that people might think they're worshipping, I don't know, let's say Sigmar, but actually they're worshipping Khorne or another god?
Yes. So there's a difference between who you think you're worshipping and what your actions with that worship really do, like what they bolster. So, for example, you can worship our warrior god Sigmar, but if your method of worship is going out and shedding blood, the act of shedding blood is what empowers Khorne. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
So it's not just a matter of who you think you're worshiping, but also what those actions lead you to do. So,
for me, for example, you've got the worshipping of Marathi, right? Now, Marathi did everything because she was trying to justify the worship of Cain. But actually, she was siphoning that power to become what we know today. And that's just one example, but that's actually a really good point around the actions. Is it actually generating favor to the gods, or are you getting favor from someone else who likes blood?
Totally. And it's interesting because I guess there's kind of two different kinds of gods, right? You have the gods of chaos and then pretty much everybody else, right? The pantheon is typically what I call them. It seems as though the gods of chaos get their energy from things that happen that mortals do, right? You kill somebody, Khorne gets power. But the other gods, the pantheon, the good guys, they don't get their power from those things. Like lightning strikes don't make Sigmar stronger. It doesn't matter. And so it's interesting where their power is tied more to the realms specifically than any actions that happen to them. So, I guess in one sense, the best thing to do is just to not pray, because you don't know who you're praying to. Because the good gods don't need it, and the bad gods just take everything they can get. So it's kind of an interesting thing with worship.
Sigmar's probably not even listening to his little gated community.
I know, yeah. It's a very exclusive club that he's a part of.
He's a jerk.
Can we just keep hitting that note so that Vince Ventrella, when he watches this later, can kind of grind his teeth while he paints? I was on Rantcast before, and we were talking about how there is a certain level of moral relativism when it comes to when you have this many fighters all fighting for what they think is the right reason. You get a lot of moral ambiguity, and so he made a joke about us being like that.
But it is true. It's very true. And,
you and I know that, and everybody else knows that, but Vince doesn't.
Yeah, well, I'm not starting a fight with Vince. Although, I could probably take him on, but no, I wouldn't actually.
He's taller than you think.
I know.
That's right. You guys were together.
Cool. Okay, religion absolutely fluid, but it's not fluid as well. And I can imagine, again, putting my Hello Heart on for a second. I'm researching and I'm doing all these wisdom and kind of trying to understand the mortal realms and looking at the storm vaults and all this stuff. but we know Zench is all about wisdom as well. It's all about knowledge, and maybe I get corrupted, I kind of crack a little bit, and I kind of slide over to the dark side in my pursuit. And that's often what happens with necromancy, is studying too much of the realm of death. You kind of get to a point where you start pushing the limits of, healing and raising the dead, and kind of playing with necromancy, and I become then I become necromancer.
It's evil. Yeah. It's the classic Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, right? They kept thinking that whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think of whether or not they should. You're like, dang. Thank you, Jeff Goldblum.
Don't talk about him. There's a gentleman called Seth Cook who posts Seth every day on my feed, and
really?
Don't talk about him. But we will talk about is a question from the chat, which is around, is there a particular god that drives the plot the most? So we kind of alluded to it already, and it's kind of changing hands a little bit, but is there a god that has driven the plot the most?
It's if I had to pick a overall, I'd probably say Sigmar. He was the most proactive god when it came to forming the Pantheon in the Age of Myth. When chaos came into the realms, he was the one who was he kind of led the Pantheon for a bit. And then when stuff went to crap, he was the one who was like, come to me and I'll lock my doors and we'll keep people safe and preserved order as much as possible. And then making the Stormcast and then all the different chambers he's released. Because every other faction has kind of been in response to his thing. So for example, Nagash does the Necroquake. It destabilizes magic. Well, Sigmar then releases his Sacrosanct Chamber, which is to control magic and ghosts and that kind of thing. And then Ossiarch Bone Reapers was a response to that, because now there's a new level of super soldier out there. So I think he's driven the plot the most, although I will say that they kind of have a shifting narrative. They'll pick pick almost like a Grand Alliance and really focus on it narratively. So the first year was really about order. This current cycle we're in is really about death. So Nagash is kind of the main character now, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agreed. Obviously, the Archeon and Chaos is kind of coming into its own now as Nagash kind of slides off. But, when you're deep into the lore, Nagash was certainly the one that had a bit of he was a part of the Pantheon. Then he struggled because he didn't want to be, one of the boys, and he wanted to do his own thing.
Yep.
And there's just been this power struggle along the way. But then,
pretty much,
Marathi has done her own stuff. So it's good that we haven't focused on one, but certainly, again, the guy who the games are named about, Sigmar, he's doing all the stuff.
For sure. Yeah.
Question from Rocco. He says, how would Doug like to see destruction become a major player in the lore now that the other three Grand Alliances have had their time in the sun? I like this question.
Yeah. So what I like is when one faction is in ascendancy, the next one comes as a direct result and pushes back on that. So right now we're seeing Nagash be ascendant at death, which I said before is kind of like a very single-minded version of order, right? It is order, it's just Nagash's way. And so his rule, his thoughts, that kind of thing. What I'd love to see is destruction as a whole rise up as a natural response of no, things are too ordered. They're too structured, right? Between order and death, everything's well too organized. So we're going to push back on that and buck off all of the ownerships and claims to lands and that kind of stuff. Nagash has a current theme that's kind of reiterating about what he deserves. So your souls should go to Nagash. He owns them basically. And taking that concept of ownership and that kind of stuff and bucking that off. So to talk about where a good place to start with that would be, we know that a bunch of Ironjaws raided one of those armories that Sigmar put around, got a big ram and are headed towards, oh my gosh, what's the name? Excelsis, the city full of Stormcasts and humans and stuff like that. So they're headed there. That would be a great one, because that would be the first time someone ever went into a city looking for trouble. That would be awesome. I'm trying to think. The Bad Moon.
I selfishly got my Bad Moon story, which is the Bad Moon is really Slaanesh, right? It's coming from Slaanesh. It's powered by Slaanesh. So I'd love to see a bit of love from the God of Excess to our little Gits.
I would definitely love to see the Bad Moon do more for sure.
Some sexy Gits.
Yeah. They multiply like they're sexy. My gosh. Trying to think. Yeah, that's my big one. What I'd like to see. I would love to see like a destruction arc. Really, I want Gordrak to be not on the same level necessarily as Archeon, but kind of up there, like elevated to like he is the focal point of destruction armies, just like Archeon's the focal point of chaos.
We don't have that for destruction, do we? We don't
Not really, no.
And to be honest, he's the only real named character. I mean, yes, we've got Scraggerot, but we don't have this super powerful 500 point plus model.
No.
We don't have an Archeon equivalent in destruction, and that's probably the closest we've got.
Yeah, and that's a shame. Like I wish almost that they had made like a standalone model, because it's cool that you have Gordrak and then you can also build him as just a mega boss on a Maw Crusher, but none of the other like centerpiece characters, like there's no not Alariel riding a beetle, right? Nobody else gets a beetle to transport them around.
By Lord on Zombie Dragon, then became Prince Vordry.
Yes.
It's like dual kits, like but it's not like this super powerful Orc, Ogre, Gargant, Grot, like this amazing, crazy, powerful, can handle it with Alariel or Nagash or Archeon. So I would love to see a destruction. And, like one thing I've loved the idea about is I'd love to see humans being brought into destruction. I'd love to see what the Feral Tribe looks like. Yep. I'd love to see what reanimated Stardrake might look like in death. Like there's just so much possibility. I think that's the ever-expanding narrative allows us to do more and more.
Yeah, I think if I could ask for anything, it would be a cross Grand Alliance army, whether that's just humans and you just like handpick just a few select units from, Cities of Sigmar or whatever, or Chaos, because they have just normal dudes, and put them in different contexts, I think would be really rad.
Yeah, I think, a few people are predicting that if there was ever a golden faction, as Vince has called it, you've got the Gargants. Because you can imagine in the old world, you had Gargants that would work with the Empire. Yep. Then Gargants could be very destruction. You could have reanimated, dead type Gargants, but then you could also have Chaos Gargants. So, I don't know. I'd like to see something that crosses between barriers.
Yeah, no joke.
Two final questions, unless something else comes up in the chat. Okay. One is coming from Buckets, and he's asked, can you ask Doug when he's going to do his Flesh Eater Courts army? He always gets excited when he talks about them.
From what I understand, I have, as far as I know, I have access to a Flesh Eater Courts army because Jack from Rerolling Ones has one. And it's often been bartered to me if I wanted it. It's just, man, there's so many dudes. And I just got off of painting a Horde army, and I'm digging my Maggotkin. Plus, I just bought a whole metric ton of Seraphon. So that's coming at you. So I don't know. But someday I probably will.
And that's another good point, is what the Slans and the new narrative when it comes to Seraphon, how that's coming into play.
Oh, you asking what I feel about it?
Oh, sure. That was more of a statement than a question, but I would love your thoughts. I would love your thoughts about Seraphon.
I think I will say it is the best of the second edition battle tomes. But like when they had a book before and then it got rewritten, it is absolutely the best because they took the things in the old one, kept them. So if you liked the first Seraphon battle tome, functionally you have not lost anything in terms of lore. But what they did, it was just added to it and really, I think, listened to what people want, which is, hey, I like lizardmen from the old world. They were really cool. And they're like, okay, here's a way that you can do that, and it doesn't diminish anything that's with the other ones. I think it was really cool.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Make Saurus Great Again. And I think that, again, coming from Warhammer Fantasy, the Saurus were the core, and the skinks and the monsters were the specialists. And you kind of saw them first, and no one was taking Saurus. They weren't very good.
No.
And it's great to see them kind of back on the table and as strong as skinks and dinosaurs. Although I think they missed a mark, and I would have loved to have seen unridden dinosaurs. And I would have loved to see like a feral type build where they might be more powerful, but they have like stupidity and like issues with bravery, and maybe they don't do what they like the squid kind of thing, right? Like their movement is random as opposed to a guaranteed move.
For sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of super wacky rules that are meant to portray specific things. Like, I mean, that's actually why I like Necromunda so much, because like it's out there with the weird stuff, but it's all to depict what would really happen. So like I miss the Orcs and Goblins animosity rule, where like they just don't get along, and sometimes they just like punch each other in the face if they're too close. I love that stuff. Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's like a mystical test, like you roll a 1 and the guys just don't stand there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, he's too dumb to do anything. You're just like,
I would love that in the feral dinosaurs. Like, cool, like do Seraphon with no riders, and on a roll of a 1, they are stupid and they don't do anything, or they don't do what you say. But in turn, if they do what you say, and you do get, you don't roll the 1, they are more dangerous and more powerful because it's that risk versus reward.
Yep, which I'm all for. Good, because I'll always risk it, because I will love it when I have the bad thing backfire. It's like, when should you overcharge a Skaven Warp Lightning Cannon? Those guys are so excited to be shooting that thing every time. Always. Exactly. Why not?
It's the same as like I'm running around with squigs, and I do my Mangler squig, and people would ask me, they're like, how powerful are these models? I'm saying, look, they could be awesome, they could be hot garbage. There's times where I've had my Mangler squig roll on a 3d6 move, roll 4. Sometimes it rolls 18.
I
don't know.
It's awesome. I love it.
That's fun.
I see. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, there are some other questions, but I want to ask you one that came up earlier that I'm not going to tell you who asked it. Okay. But who is your favorite person from Rerolling Wands?
Ooh, you, the viewer. If you're going to make me answer and not be dodgy about it, Jack's my boy. I think we're on the same level with a lot of things, and we just get along really well. But I love them all.
He's the one who asked, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Of course it was Jack. Who?
If you had a dream battle force, what would be in that box?
Ooh, I had a dream. Like a start collecting box.
Yeah, or even like what they've done at Christmas time, where they have like that big box.
Yeah. My dream box. Ooh, that would be, man. That's real rough. They didn't ask for a specific faction.
Oh,
son of a gun. Okay. I would probably go with Cities of Sigmar, because that seems like a hard faction to get into sometimes, or can be, where it's the perfect typical free guild regiment, where you have some cannons from the Ironwell Arsenal, a captain, and some dudes with guns and spears. That's all I got. I don't have anything fancy. That's a hard question just to pull out of the air.
I'm going to pick the Sons of Behemoth, because I just want a cheap army when it comes out.
Here's the thing about the Sons of Behemoth, right? If you say to me, like, Doug, close your eyes, get excited, and then you whisper softly, all Gargant army, like, I'm on board instantly. But I want them to have variety in their model kits. I don't want it to be like just buy 10 of the same model.
No, what I want is, again, my OG Warhammer Fantasy mind, is I want Gargants and Halflings. Gargants and Halflings. That's what I want. So I'd love little Halfling troops running around.
Yeah.
Give me some Halfling hot pots. Give me some chicken riding Halflings. Give me some Gargants who can throw my dudes. Throw some Halflings like a cannon, and maybe I can steal an objective that way, or I don't know. That's my dream. That's what I'd love from a narrative perspective.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't beat that. That's awesome.
let me pick up your Stonehorn and throw it. Let me just pick up a piece of terrain and throw it. I don't know.
I wish we had more rules for stuff like that, for throwing things. I don't know why. I think it's awesome. It's one of the things that War Machine and Hordes has that this game doesn't, where I'm like, why can't he throw things?
Actually, one more crazy rule that we used to have in fantasy that I wish they brought over was, when you used to release fanatics, the fanatics would mow through your grots before they got to the enemy. So you'd actually, like, imagining the fanatics sitting at the behind of the ranks, they would start swirling. They would then hit your own dudes and then hit your opponents. So There was, I think you could even like roll a dice to see if they like, parted the seas and like not get hit by the swirling balls. But
oh, that's awesome.
Maybe last question is around. This is coming from Grant. So question 1 is around the Seraphon, and
Okay.
if you were the one writing the third book, I imagine Seraphon Part 3, what would the next stages for them be after the Coalesced?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it'd be something where they integrate more into society. I mean, for some reason, the only thing I can think of is like Argonians from Morrowind or Skyrim or whatever. But something where they do interact more with other races, I think is super important. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a funny name for them. Let's say like the Starborn, the Coalesced, and like the Readmitted. Just back in society. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, they've got a corporate job and they're sitting in the office. And
exactly. Yeah.
Copying and
use them as interns. Yep.
Skinking does the runs, and then finally the second part to that is, will they have a unified race? Will they be starborn in different realms and different things?
I think always different. I think going forward, there's never going to be a unified thing because Games Workshop doesn't want that. I think they want everyone to have their own flavor and that kind of stuff.
And I think it's great to as well have that that influence from the realm. So what does that Shaman type lizardman look like, or Seraphon look like, versus what does the Ulgu ones?
For sure.
And speaking of Ulgu, actually, the last question, unless it kind of comes up really quickly, is if you were going to paint the Cornate Lord on Kakadrak from a freaky realm of Ulgu, how would you go about it? So how would you make this more shadowy?
So Ulgu is a realm that we haven't really interacted with much to understand what it's like. I think that basing would tell a bigger story than any specific. I mean, like paint schemes, you can always go dark. I mean, just desaturated colors for sure. I would probably put a cloak on, like a hood and a cape over the rider to make it look like he's trying to blend in a little bit. What are some other things? That's basically lots of use of black and gray and the color schemes and the basing. That's about the best I can think of, because like I said, we haven't really seen really great depictions of what it's like with modeling. So that's a hard realm. That and Hish right now are really hard ones. The other ones are much easier.
Yeah, I would agree. Do you think the Grand Alliances will ever go back to like fantasy, where it's literally just a pile in, like everyone fights everyone, or do you think the Grand Alliances are here to stay?
They're here to stay, 100%. I think they're here to stay because they allow for people to have ways to play. Like they allow for Games Workshop to reasonably say, you cannot make a wrong purchase. You know what I mean? Like if you are playing Night Haunt and you grab that one box of Ossiarch Bone Reapers that looks cool, they have a method for which you can play them all together. As far as everybody fighting each other, like every battle tome has reasonable choices as to why they would even fight themselves. Like even the new Seraphon one is like the Slan see these different great plans, and sometimes they conflict with one another because none of them have a crystal clear memory of what the old ones wanted them to do. And so I think the hardest one to justify is why Stormcast would fight each other, but I don't know. The Space Marines has the same problem, so it's just kind of a cross Games Workshop thing.
They're fighting for Sigmar's love.
Yes.
But speaking of the Seraphon, the last question that we're going to end the show on, and then we'll wrap up, is about the Seraphon coming from Drake. So Drake has asked, is Sotek, so the lizardman serpent god of the old world, the same god as the Dracothian one in Age of Sigmar? So the new Seraphon battle tome seems to hint at the Dracothian's tail and the fangs of Sotek. So are they the same?
My understanding is no. I'm still currently going through that book. My lore videos got sidetracked with all the crap that's going on in the world right now. I work in healthcare. So things are kind of crazy. but my understanding is no, that the Seraphon had those ideas of Dracothian and Sotek from before, and then they just kind of, they might have like, I know some of the Coalesced have attributed those things to Dracothian, but I don't believe it's ever like crystallized that is exactly what is going on, because we know that some of the Coalesced have reverted back to some of their more primal thoughts. So I can give you a maybe right now. The thing is like a lot of the Seraphon lore is still like conjecture. Like some scholars say blank. That's not an affirmation of that. It's just a theory. And so a lot of their stuff is theory. But if it does come up, it'll definitely be in a lore video.
Yeah, and you know, maybe to my perception, and maybe a nice way to close this out is it's hashtag your narrative. So,
yes, yeah.
So what you want to do, it is your hobby. If you see the world in a certain way and you want to create something that is unique to yourself, your story, your narrative, you read a book, you watch a video, and you're inspired to explore the realms in your own way, do as you want to do. Don't let particular people in Games Workshop dictate your hobby. At the same time, feel free to use that for inspiration to explore the world how you want to see it. So if you want to have an all-female Stormcast army, do it. If you want to have a Stormcast army come from a particular death realm and they've got death masks, do it.
And I definitely think that's an interesting one. That even if it's not in the book, I still like that enough that maybe I would do that. Is have, I mean, because you got Warcry warbands that all think Archaon is the avatar of, whatever fictitious deity they come up with that is not actually in the game. So why couldn't they say that Dracothian is a god beast, is the avatar of Sotek or something like that? That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And like there's just so much you could possibly do. So Doug, this has been amazing. The thing is, we could continue this conversation for a long time, and we'd still only be scratching the surface. But the great news is that you've been creating videos for years now that digs into the lore that is Age of Sigmar. You have been digging into some other game systems, but your Age of Sigmar library is very extensive, so I'd highly recommend people check that out. I will link your Getting Started shows, your playlist below, so people who are exploring can start somewhere. Doug, is there any shout outs, anything you want to kind of wrap this session up with? Any love and respect, and like check these guys out?
So if you want to see some of these narrative games in action, Rerolling Ones, they've been in the chat. I can see because I pulled up YouTube, and they do great. Like a lot of their stuff is narrative based. They don't choose armies based on the most competitive, which frankly I like, that they don't do that. So seeing some of those lore things in action is a lot of fun. As far as just encouraging people to do lore stuff, honestly, play Path to Glory and make your leaders have a background, and then just build a full army from there. I think it's the best way to get attached to those miniatures in a way that's meaningful. Love it.
And my parting piece of advice is, if nothing more, put names on your army lists when you submit them to a tournament. Just create some names and stick with them. Use those names over every army, and it's a simple thing. It creates a story, and hopefully gets you exploring more. Doug, I know you did a video not long ago where there is a company that allows you to print the names of little go around your bases. So if you wanted to call, I don't know, your fearless general, I don't know, Anthony, you could print that out, and you'd be carrying that with you to the test of time, which is obviously great for role playing, a little RPG skirmish games, but also for Age of Sigmar. So
100%. And they some people who are more competitive are like, I don't like these because they do make your base like a millimeter bigger. Who cares? Like I can't imagine a person at an event actually giving a crap. But the thing that it adds is it does make them stand out like a little perfect statue, and it just adds so much. The company is Versatile Terrain. If you're interested in that, they're really cool. So it's been awesome, man. Thanks you so much for having me on.
No, the guys in the chat have really enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed to Doug already, go over to his channel, smash that subscription button, go like his videos, go watch his videos. If you enjoy what he does, make sure to jump onto his Patreon as well. He's very
thank you.
generous lover, a kind friend. but more importantly, has given so much to the community over a long time, and in a dark period as well, where people were very, very, negative against the narrative, and I think we've proven that there's a lot to explore, and again, we've only touched the surface. So I hope you've enjoyed the show, Doug. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you've enjoyed it, please do comment below. Let us know what you think, what Azir looks like as well. I'm curious to hear what people think, what Azir might look like in their world.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your week.